The highway stretches into the dark, quiet, endless, and filled with stories no one should ever hear. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where the truth is stranger than fiction. Tonight, we bring you 6 unbelievable horror trucker stories, real encounters from fog-covered roads, empty rest stops, and nights where the world outside the windshield feels like another place entirely. Before we begin, we've set a goal: let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help keep our wheels turning through the dark. If you're new here, subscribe to the Sleep Haunt and join us for more eerie journeys ahead. Now, sit back, breathe slow, and listen. The road is waiting, and tonight, it has stories you won't believe. Story number 1. He liked crossing the high desert at night. The air stayed cool out there, the sky so clear it seemed the stars were watching. He hauled paper that week, a trailer stacked with quiet cargo that didn't shift or rattle when the wind pressed against the sidewall. The route cut along a string of empty towns and wider silence. Broken fences, sagebrush that shivered in invisible currents, old billboards leaning into the dark. He set the cruise, took a deep breath, and let the night do what it always did: hold everything steady until the other side. The CB was background company, mostly weather reports, and the soft talk of drivers counting down miles. Somewhere around mile 139, a voice he hadn't heard before slid in with very little static. "Granite Well's got hot coffee and a clean lot tonight. Pump lights are on." No one answered for a second. Then another driver keyed up, warm and amused. "Granite Well? Haven't heard that name in a minute." "It's open," the first voice replied, unbothered. "No scales for 50 miles. Plenty of room." He glanced at the fuel gauge and the clock. He wasn't in trouble on either, but there was a long run of emptiness ahead, and the thought of a quiet lot where the wind would be broken by another set of walls sounded good. He pictured a lighted canopy and a night clerk with a tired smile and a cat curled near the counter. Those small mercies mattered when the miles all looked the same. He passed a green sign with a reflective sheen, a place name and a number, and counted out 5 deep breaths. No need to rush. The CB drifted back to traffic and night weather, a mention of thin fog settling in washes. He rolled over a bridge so low and narrow, it felt like taking a breath for the truck and letting it out through the other end. The road in front was empty. Behind him, a dot of light grew, then shrank, then was gone as another driver turned off to a road that didn't have a number big enough to show on a map. Then he saw it. The canopy lights came up from the shoulder like a pale dawn, the kind that lifts the dark without warming it. A tall sign made its own little constellation, and the letters did say Granite Well, the paint perfect in the glow. The lot was tidy, lanes freshly striped, a low building with a diner face and a long porch like a promise that nothing moved too fast here. He pulled in slow, listening to the gravel decisions under his tires. As the truck straightened, he saw 2 rigs already parked, one dark blue with the hood up a little, as if it were thinking, and a short reefer with its unit humming a quiet, even chord. The building door opened under a bell with a tone old-fashioned and confident. That comfort bell's wood, warm light wrapped around him as clean as a blanket after the wind. The clerk was an older woman with silver hair tied back and a sweater the color of dry wheat. Her voice matched the bell, gentle and clear. "Fuel or fill and rest?" "Rest," he said, though the narration held to third person in his mind, because the feeling was mutual. The road wanted him to stop here for a beat. He placed a bill on the counter for coffee and a slice of pie. The cat on the counter lifted its head, eyes the steady gold of a tunnel light, and then returned to its slow breathing. He caught the little things. The wall clock had hands, not numbers, and both pointed to the same place they did when he walked in, and after the coffee, and after the pie. The coffee tasted fresh, but also like the flavor might be following him instead of coming from the cup. The radio behind the counter softly played a song he almost recognized, a chorus that never seemed to reach the chorus, and an acoustic guitar with only one new note every minute. On a corkboard near a load posting sheet, the flyers were neat and uncurled, their ink a decade older than the pushpins. He stepped out to do a walk-around and let the cab cool a little. The air smelled like distant rain, the way desert air sometimes does, even under stars. A truck down the row coughed and turned off. The glow inside its sleeper faded like a breath on glass. A driver with a red hat stepped out, stretched, and gave a half-wave. The kind strangers exchange when both are in the same small country for a moment. It all felt right. It all felt like the kind of right that whispers, Stay a while. He drew the curtains and let the cab become a small room. The pillow had the dune sand scent of laundry soap. The windshield shade clicked into place with a sound his hands knew by heart. He set an alarm and lay down. The truck stood still like a horse that understands how to sleep standing, and the night, with its generous dark, began to read him a story he had heard before. He woke because the CB hissed. The hiss had tone, like someone breathing close to a microphone. He looked to the clock on the dash. It said 2:17. His alarm sat quiet. Outside, the lot was quiet too, without the gentle rattle of the reefer unit that had been 2 spaces over. He slid one curtain back an inch. The canopy lights were the same, but beyond them, the highway had gone very far away. The porch was empty. No sign of the man in the red hat. The bell over the door didn't ring because nobody touched it. He exhaled, listened to his own breath, and told himself tired drivers wake in the short hours for no reason. He lay back down. The hiss grew, and then stopped. His alarm still sat quiet. The smell of coffee from the diner still seemed fresh enough to rise through the floorboard, as if coffee had a schedule separate from brewing. The second time, he woke because something tapped in a rhythm. Not urgent. Not fast. He slid the curtain a little wider. The same 2 rigs stood where they had been. The canopy lights didn't buzz, but he felt they should. He checked the dash clock again. 2:17. He clicked on the small dome light, checked his phone. It had no bars, which wasn't unusual out there. The phone clock said 2:17. He watched it. It said 2:17. He watched it longer than he realized he could watch a small clock on a small screen. It still said 2:17. He put the phone face down. The tap came again, from the trailer side. He stepped into his boots and opened the door to a night so gentle, it chose not to make his breath visible. The gravel made sound. The asphalt did not. He walked the trailer length with his flashlight low, the beam narrow out of courtesy to the dark. He found nothing wrong. The seal hung whole. The landing gear looked the same. He looked toward the porch and saw the cat in the window. If it was the cat from the counter, it had aged a day or a year in the space between. He lifted a hand. Nothing moved. He went inside for the bathroom, because sometimes that solves a lot. The bell rang in that same confident tone. The clerk smiled in the same way. "You doing all right, dear?" she asked, and her voice had warmth he could feel the way one can feel a sunbeam through glass. "Long night," he said. "Appreciate the stop." "You take your time," she replied. The radio behind her still searched for its next chord. The clock still declared 2:17. On the counter, the cat had returned. He looked down and found the cat also in the window glass, and on the edge of the pie case 3 cats that were one cat, all of them breathing slowly in imperfect unison. He nodded, felt his own breath match theirs for a moment, and then went back to the lot. He decided to leave. He wasn't in danger. He had rest. The road would carry him, and the miles would resume their usual way of counting themselves. He eased out, careful on the turn, and rolled toward the exit. The trailers glowed faintly with the light from the canopy. The exit was the kind he liked, a long merge that let his truck gather itself before rejoining the rhythm of the highway. He signaled, checked mirrors, and then checked again. The highway was a shadow river. He took the curve, and then the bell rang. Behind him, cheerful as ever. His headlights slid across the window as they had when he first arrived. He was back under the canopy, idling gently in his spot. The trailer, 2 spaces over, hummed with the steady chord of its refrigerated unit. The engine of the blue truck chuffed and settled. The porch light made a soft circle on the boards. He looked at the dash. Ardienschitsifen. It takes a moment to admit a loop when you find yourself walking in one. He turned the wheel sharply and aimed for the far end of the lot, where a line of tamarisk trees shivered and a dirt road cut toward the darker side of the horizon. He edged past a dumpster that smelled only faintly of cardboard, took the gravel slow to keep from throwing any, and found an opening that led onto a frontage road. The frontage road connected with the highway at a different angle. He fed the accelerator and felt, for a brief second, the lift of relief this time. He'd broken the shape of it. The cat appeared in the reflection on the passenger window, looking like a small pale moon. The bell rang again, this time as memory in his ear. He looked forward and saw the canopy lights. He was back, aligned with his earlier tracks. The truck settled. He shut the engine off and sat with his hands on the wheel, as if quiet might discourage whatever mechanism had engaged. The CB came alive with a short breath, and the same voice he'd heard on the run-in. "Don't let it tell you when to sleep," the voice said. Not quite a whisper, not quite a statement. "Count the posts." He looked out at the highway shoulders. In the dark beyond the lot, reflective posts marked the right edge every so many yards. Some wore white reflectors, some red, some had lost their faces to weather. He nodded, because the body sometimes knows to agree when the mind doesn't know where to stand. He restarted the engine, rolled toward the exit like a swimmer going back into cold water. He merged with the lane, put his right wheels onto the rumble strip, the sound a long, quiet growl under his feet, and began to count. 1, 2, 3. Each post rolled past like a metronome. 4, 5, 6. Nothing changed. 7, 8, 9, 10. The highway stretched and said nothing, as if it were a friend waiting for him to finish speaking. He thought of the way the clerk's sweater had matched the wheat, the way the bell respected itself, the way the cats overlapped. He counted 11, 12, 13. The hum in the trailer 2 spaces over receded behind him, but a second hum entered its place, a twin without a source. The posts ran out. There was a gap like a held breath. He kept to the strip. 14 appeared farther away than the last had. 15 was closer, like a wink. He counted on. At 30, the sound of the rumble strip deepened, as if the grooves had widened. At 31, his mirrors were full of canopy light that did not belong, an impossible geometry in red and gold, and he refused to look. At 32, the CB broke with a crackle, and the breath of someone who had been silent too long. "Don't look," the voice said, almost patient. "Count to 47. He counted. 41. 42. At 43, the highway made a small mischief under his right front wheel. 44. The stars above him shifted their map by a hair, like someone had stood behind glass and moved it half an inch left. 45. The rumble strip became a long chord, like the reefer units in a choir. 46. He said 47 out loud in the cab because sometimes the air needs to know you mean it. He crossed a seam in the asphalt that the truck felt all the way through. The mirrors were empty of light, not his. The highway opened into what highways do, a straight line that allowed for mistakes. He blinked, looked down. The clock said 2:18. The truck let out a sigh that might have been his own. In the distance, a pair of hazard lights pulsed a reliable orange. He guided the rig toward them and saw a state truck parked in the median, its driver standing with a notebook and a reflective vest that breathed in the light and let it go again. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. The CB hissed once more and turned itself back into static. Out his window, posts kept their rhythm and made no demands. He drove until the idea of stopping felt like a choice again, not a condition. A sunrise built itself with slow care, turning the desert floor from slate to silver to brushed gold. He passed a green sign like the one he had seen before, and instinctively checked the lot where Granite Well should have been. There was a slab. The canopy was a skeleton, ribs of metal turned the wrong way. The porch existed only as bleached boards stacked by a surveyor's stake. The tall sign was cracked and patched with old stickers from clubs that hadn't met in years. A handwritten notice hung on a nail. No trespass. The cat was not there. The bell, if there had been one, could not have rung. Later, in daylight, at a truck wash with hoses hissing like gentle rain, a man with a sunburned neck admired the paper load and told a story in that way drivers have, not forcing anything. Granite Well, he said, had burned years ago. Some said lightning had done it. Some said a kitchen fire found something old in the rafters and took everything politely but firmly. He shrugged and dried his hands on a cloth that had earned its stains. Folks say if you're off your sleep, if your clock's mismatched to the dark, you'll still see lights there. Gets you to stop for a minute. Gets you to keep on longer than you should. Best not to trust a place that doesn't match the map. He nodded, though he hadn't told the man his part. The road had a way of carrying the things it needed to tell, and the rest belonged to the miles between. That night, When he came through the next set of emptiness in a different state, he kept an eye on the posts. He kept a gentle grip on the wheel, and a softer one on the idea that time moves 1 minute at a time in every place for everyone. Sometimes the desert keeps a spot where the hand stops just above the dial, and the bell rings in a warm, clean tone for as long as it needs to. He drove on, counted his miles, and slept at a place with a cracked soda machine that took his dollar and gave it back, politely, as if the night had decided enough was enough. Story number 2. The pickup was routine, the kind of night a driver counts on. A quiet industrial park, a sodium-lit gatehouse, a stack of pallets already wrapped and strapped inside a trailer that smelled faintly of new cardboard and rain-wet concrete. She signed, nodded to the warehouse man with the bar-coded scanner, and received a sealed trip envelope with the paperwork. The envelope had weight, not much, just enough to remind her that every mile had its own instructions. The route north was simple. She liked simple. Simple gave the mind room to listen. On the dash, the wipers ticked in a slow rhythm. A thin front was crossing the plains, not a storm so much as a smear of weather that turned the edge of the highway glossy. She eased onto the interstate and felt the long pull of the rig come together. The tractor, the cargo, the tires writing in faint chalk across the wet. The truck settled into its pace. Ahead, the dark was a deep blue, with a horizon the color of a cut pearl. At the first long straightaway, she opened the envelope. Typed bill of lading. A printed route sheet with a highlighted line that matched what she already knew. On the bottom corner of the sheet, in blue pen and tidy handwriting that made careful letters, a small note had been added. Between mile 80, 8 and 92. Stay out of the left lane. It read like a courtesy. Some shippers left helpful comments, steep grades, tricky merges. A heads up about a scale house that had a habit of being opened when no one wanted it to be. She tucked the envelope back into the pocket by the seat. When the green sign for mile 88 slid out of the dark, she drifted over to the right and let the rig hold steady. The left lane looked normal. A car passed, a taillight comet, and was gone. She watched the white lines unspool and waited for something to justify the ink. At mile 91, a gust of wind crossed the road and rolled a sheet of construction plastic from the median. It lifted, filled, and sailed like a ghost flag into the left lane. A pickup hit it, and the plastic clung across its windshield. A friendly prank turned mean. The pickup slowed, hazard lights blinking on in small pulses of apology, and drew to the shoulder with patient care. She moved her foot to make room and saw the sense in blue ink. When the last hybrid hum of hazard lights faded behind her, she exhaled and smiled at the idea that someone at the warehouse kept a list of minor graces to hand out. She told herself it was neat. That was all. The miles picked themselves up and set themselves down. The CB stayed quiet, nothing but a few low conversations about weather, and a burst of laughter from two drivers running together 40 miles back. Her coffee cooled to a hollow warmth she still liked. The envelope sat in the pocket like a calm passenger. An hour later, she reached for it without quite meaning to. The truck was on cruise. The road had become the kind of polite that made people drowsy if they forgot to breathe properly. She pulled the envelope free and gently shook out the papers. A second note, same stacked, careful handwriting, had been attached to the route sheet as if it had always been there. Avoid Prairie Sand Rest Area. Keep rolling to Cotton Bend. She frowned, not in distrust exactly, but in curiosity. Rest areas came and went. Some had machines that ate $1 and gave back exactly nothing, an exchange so final it felt like a lesson. Some had lights that flickered in a way that made the night feel nervous. Maybe Prairie Sand had a reputation she hadn't heard. She had planned to stop and stretch. She adjusted the idea by an inch. Cotton Bend was 9 miles farther and had a long row for rigs and a view of the river if the night let it show. The note read like a nudge, the kind the world gives someone who is technically fine and could be slightly better. Prairie Sand came up on the right. The lamps a bouquet of amber. The sign a neat white rectangle. The entrance was smooth. The lot looked tidy. She noticed nothing wrong, except that she had been told to keep going. So she did. Because honoring a whisper costs nothing. As she passed the exit, the lights behind her dimmed a fraction and returned, the way a room does when a large motor starts somewhere on the same grid. In the convex mirror, the lot shrank, and then was gone under the line of trees. Cotton Bend had a vending machine that did return her dollar, and gave a bottle of water that clicked cool against her palm. She walked a slow circle around the truck, listened to the tires speak in their soft rubber hush, checked a strap for the sake of touching something and finding it secure. The river was mostly a sound in the dark, a constant idea of movement. In the restroom, the fluorescent hum had the tone of a choir someone had recorded wrong, and the tiles held the day's last warmth. Back in the cab, she glanced at the envelope on the seat. It looked ordinary, which was such a relief. It made her laugh out loud at herself for expecting anything but paper to stay paper. She slid the envelope into the pocket again, rolled back onto the highway, and let the truck find its long night rhythm. Past midnight, the interstate thinned. A set of taillights ahead played far-off lighthouse with her red dots that didn't change size for a long time. Her phone sat in its cradle. Screen dark. The sound of the truck at speed filled the cab like a low song without words. She reached for the envelope with the same habit as someone touching a lucky charm. The route sheet had shifted. Another note had tucked itself under the paperclip. The same blue letters, the same tidy hand. This time, it included her name, spelled right. Do not answer calls at 1:36. She looked at the clock. 1:29. She felt the body double sensation one gets when the brain sees itself from the ceiling. Small astonishment. Small disbelief. There were explanations so normal they might have scolded her for thinking otherwise. Someone at the warehouse who liked to help. Someone with access to GPS pings and traffic updates and the results of countless driver stories. She told herself it was a program. She told herself it was a human with a good memory. She told herself a third thing and didn't finish the thought. At 1:36, the phone vibrated and lit up with a number that offered no location. It rang. The sound was familiar, but a touch too loud. She watched the road. She watched the phone. She did nothing. The ring continued and then stopped, the way a tap on the shoulder stops when no one turns around. The silence that followed was not dramatic or eerie, only complete. When the quiet had a heartbeat again, she slid the envelope onto her lap and used the back of the fuel receipt to write a small message. Who are you? She didn't expect a response. She set the receipt under the paperclip, drove another 15 miles, past a closed way station with cones that leaned on themselves like sleepy birds, and made peace with her own curiosity, as if it were another passenger she could keep at a respectful distance. An hour later, the truck rolled through a low valley where the radio found stations and lost them within a mile. She took the envelope out of its pocket and saw a new piece of paper tucked behind the bill of lading. It was a simple line in that now familiar hand. You. Later. Listen. She folded it once and put it in the sleeve on the visor. The first surprise had been the handwriting. The second was how light she felt after reading an answer that made very little sense. Sometimes relief arrives not because something is solved, but because the thing you suspect is given permission to exist. The highway lifted into hills. The rain turned to a delicate mist that made the world soft and gave every reflector more patience. The notes kept their distance until the toll plaza outside Cedar Hollow. Approaching, she saw the gleam of yellow slickers and the coppery sheen of wet asphalt under high lamps. A booth hopped lanes to keep up with the traffic trickle. The sign flashed the cost in numbers that did not account for the weather. As she slowed, she drew the envelope to her knee one more time. The note was brief, black-inked this time, as if written with whatever pen was at hand. Do not roll your window down for the man in the yellow slicker. This was specific enough to make amusement impossible. She took a slow breath. These plazas were predictable. Taking cash sometimes required a handover that included a smile and a word. She watched the lanes, chose the one with the shortest line, and eased forward, exact bills ready. The attendant wore a slicker, as expected. He leaned in the space between his booth and her window, friendly, careful. Through the glass, he said something she could not hear. She held up the bills. He nodded, accepted the money with a gloved hand through the narrow drawer, and, before pushing the change, made a motion that asked her to let the window down a bit. She shook her head politely, tapped the glass once with 2 fingers in a gesture that meant the same as a sorry mouthed silently, and left it closed. He stared at her for a fraction longer than a transaction asks, then slid the change and receipt, the drawer moving with its familiar smoothness. She thanked him through the glass. He made a motion again, She smiled and put the truck in gear, making the whole act so normal it could be described as boring. In the mirror, the slicker shone like a piece of sunset. He did not step away. He turned to the next car without looking back. The road on the other side of the plaza felt newer, somehow like the asphalt had been poured in the last hour. She set the cruise at a speed that suited the mist, and the way the world around her had begun to feel like a game with rules she could learn if she kept her shoulders level. The envelope. She didn't want it to become a superstition, something she needed to touch every certain number of miles. But the notes appeared when they wanted to, like sparrows that had figured out windows. Another paper waited now, clipped neatly at the back. It read, "When you hear 3 knocks under the floor, lift your foot, count to 5, and do not use the brake." It felt ridiculous to agree with paper. It felt more ridiculous not to. She told herself she would treat it like any advisory. She would obey and honor the fact that none of this demanded anything cruel of her. The highway climbed, leveled, and crossed a cattle guard, whose metal bars sang under the tires in a soft series of notes. After that, the quiet returned. She thought of nothing in particular, which is a gift. The knocks arrived dozens of miles later, 3 soft taps under the floorboard, so subtle her mind could have filed them under imagination. Her foot lifted. She counted. Steady. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A car in the left lane braked suddenly for a piece of furniture that had fallen from a pickup and spun like a slow coin, and a chain of red lights bloomed. Her truck, already in its own cadence, slid by steady as a ship. It looked like necessity turned into grace, and grace accepted without fanfare. Past the ridge, a sign warned about crosswinds, good advice without elaboration. The envelope offered more. Among the high bridges ahead, at river span, keep both hands open on the wheel, loosen your grip, and let the truck float for 8 seconds at the center. The words made sense to a driver who understood that machines also respond to being allowed to do their job. Too firm is as poor a choice as too loose. Riverspan announced itself with concrete shoulders and lampposts that leaned toward the center in a way that made the space feel tall. Water below ran the color of coins in shade. The wind came side on, not violent, but insistent. She took the bridge at a respectful speed, felt the first push, and did as the ink asked, opened her hands, breathed so slow she heard nothing but her own breath, and waited for 8 counts she kept like secrets. On count 3, a sudden gust tried to invent a mistake for her. The trailer wavered, and then found the line again because she had given it room. On count 8, she returned her hands to the wheel the way one touches a friend's shoulder, gentle, reassuring. In her mirror, hazard lights lit up far behind her, small orange stars in a straight line, and she did as all drivers learn to do with distant trouble. Kept moving, kept watch, kept going. She started reading the notes the way one reads road signs, not because of fear but because they enlarged what was already there. At a junction, the paper told her to bypass a promising exit because a long backup waited over the hill. She obeyed. A mile later, she looked left and watched brake lights tangled together for half a county. At a rest stop, the notes told her to park 1 slot farther from the light pole than she would have chosen. When she returned from washing her hands and rinsing her face with water that smelled faintly of metal, a box truck had squeezed into the space she would have taken, its driver apologetic to no one and everyone, his head bent to the glow of his phone. She laughed quietly and allowed herself a precise, small wonder. The one instruction she nearly ignored came at the edge of dawn. A faint pink picked up the bottoms of clouds. Her eyes had that perfect forward focus of someone who has learned to blend night into morning. The note said, "Do not take the rover. Scenic bypass. It will be closed for filming until 9. She could see the sign for the bypass from where she was, its promise of a gentle curve above the river and a pull-off where she knew she could see a ridge that rolled out like the back of a sleeping animal. She wanted it. She also wanted to continue obeying a hand that kept drawing paths straight when they needed to be straight. She stayed on the main line and watched white trucks with company logos try the bypass and stop in a line that looked like beads on a string. The words "closed for filming" made her think of quietly busy people with radios, standing just out of frame, and she smiled at the image of a crew wrapping cable at the edge of a highway while the day turned itself on. Near the end of the run, with the city an hour away and the day fully awake, the envelope felt heavier. Not literally, only in the way certain objects gather meaning along the route. She put it on the passenger seat, a courtesy to the thing that had carried messages in a confident hand. At the last fuel stop, she wrote something on the back of a receipt with a stubby pencil from the counter by the coffee. "Thank you." Then, after a full minute with the pencil between her fingers, she added a question. "What do I owe?" It was the kind of question people ask the night, or the road, or even themselves in the quiet. She sealed the envelope out of habit and set it upright in the pocket. The highway squared itself into a straight shot toward an industrial district where gulls circled the ends of nowhere like snow. At the receiver's yard, she backed neatly into the dock, a line as precise as any she had made in a parking lot full of hands watching. The lift beeped in a rhythm that did not mind being heard. Paperwork slid across a counter. The dockman signed and stapled and offered a paperclip in a way that suggested he did this with a kind of pride. When she returned to the cab and unsealed the envelope to put the signed proof inside, another note waited, one she had not seen the last time she checked, one that looked like it had been part of the stack from the beginning. The ink was her own favorite dull black, the kind her pen made after a week of use. The coffee ring on the corner was familiar enough to feel like a memory. The handwriting was hers in the way voices sound like themselves when recorded and played back from a distance. "Leave this in the next load," it read. "Use it when you need. You don't owe. You pass it on." She touched the curve of the ring on the paper, thinking of the mug in her sleeper, the one with the chip on the rim she had been meaning to retire and hadn't quite. There was a moment where she could have been frightened of herself, or of a world that allowed paper to carry messages across kinds of time. Instead, she thought of the corner of the warehouse where she took this envelope, the way the scanner had beeped and the barcodes had obeyed. She thought of the driver she would pass on the interstate that afternoon, the one with the weary nod, the one who would take a left just before the scales and a right after the low overpass. She thought of blue ink, then black ink, then a hand that would pick up whichever pen was close. The road made a habit of teaching drivers to receive and then to give space at the merge, patience at the pump, quiet at 3 in the morning when someone needed the next stall to themselves. None of those things carried the oddness of notes that knew the shape of a night. This did, and yet it was gentle, in its way. It asked for no ceremony. It asked for small acts. Don't answer a phone. Move over a lane. Lay a handlight on the wheel. She slid the signed receiver's copy into the envelope and tucked the whole thing into the side pocket once more. The city would let her out with the kind of traffic that pretended impatience and rewarded calm. The next pickup would be different in all the ways routes are different, and the same in all the ways roads are the same. When it came, she would open the new envelope and see if this one had anything to say. If it did, she would listen. If it didn't, she would shrink her attention to the lane and the mirror and the sky. Driving out, she passed under a series of overpasses that stacked like ribs and threw repeating shadows across the hood. In one of those alternating bands of light and dark, she spotted a driver standing by his truck with a paper in his hand, reading alone as if reading out loud without speaking. He looked up at her, then back down like he had found the sentence he had been hoping would be there, and waved once. That night, parked at a place where the lights buzzed and moths made careful ovals, she took the envelope to the bunk. She slipped out the notes and placed them in order across the blanket, as if she were laying out small photographs, between mile 88 and 92. Avoid prairie sand. Do not answer calls. Do not roll your window down. Lift your foot. Let the truck float. She added her thank you paper to the row, aligned with the rest. The words made a shorthand prayer she could feel in her knuckles and her back and the long line of her attention. She didn't need the notes to keep a rig right side up and between the paint. She had that already, but now she also had the knowledge that someone herself, or not herself, stood somewhere along the road, thinking of ways to make a night less lonely and a morning less surprised. Someone would say later, over a coffee pour and the clatter of spoons, that a lot of drivers get good at reading the world a half hour ahead, that sometimes those instincts look like magic from the outside. Maybe that was what lived in the envelope, the slow accumulation of one person's hard-earned instincts, written down and offered generously to the only person who would obey them without arguing. She put the papers back in their sleeve and turned out the light. The truck clicked as it cooled. The freeway beyond the lot whispered and settled, and then rose again the way wind does. Between 1 mile and the next, the kind of sleep drivers get arrived careful, alert, full of distance, and kind. She woke once in the short hours, listened to far-off tires whisper on a grade, and reached for the envelope to make sure it was still there. It was. She smiled as if she'd found a small gift left on a windowsill. Morning would pick itself up in its own time. When it did, she would drive toward it, and if paper spoke to her in tidy letters, she would listen. And somewhere, later, she would pick up a pen without thinking and add one more line for a night when someone else needed it. Story number 3. The load was panes of interior glass, stacked and banded, a quiet weight that didn't complain at corners. He liked that about glass. Careful freight made the rest of the night careful by default. The route ran up toward a mountain pass, with a name he'd grown up hearing on weather radio. Long Pine. Early spring, the kind that insists on cold air even when the calendar suggests otherwise. The forecast wasn't dramatic dry pavement, pockets of wind, a hint of flurries above 6,000 feet that would tick like static against the windshield and melt before the wipers reached. He set the cruise a notch below what habit might pick, let the truck recite the grade in a calm voice, and watched the reflector posts drift steadily past. Far below, a river curled and flashed. The sky was so crisp he could feel the stars without seeing them, like a frost that never quite touched the ground. Between the valley and the climb, a signboard blinked amber. Be prepared to stop road work ahead. He frowned and eased off a touch more. Work at this hour wasn't unheard of, but the board's lamps had a halogen warmth, not the usual sharp LED white and old-fashioned glow that called to mind aero boards from a decade past, the kind you could feel through the steering wheel when you passed them, their current humming faintly against their metal frames. He listened on the CB. A few voices traded weather notes from another highway entirely. No chatter about closures, no pilot car warnings. He changed channels once and back. Nothing. Maybe they'd shut a lane for rock netting. Maybe a pothole had gone honest and declared itself a crater. Past the next curve, another sign appeared on the shoulder, mounted square to the lane. Slow follow pilot car. An old yellow sedan idled ahead with an amber bar on the roof. The hazard flash, oddly polite, 2 lights winking in a patient, out-of-sync rhythm. Its tailpipe sent up steam like breath on a mirror. A figure in a reflective jacket stood by the driver's door, baton down, then raised the baton and pointed to the sedan as if directing a school play. He slowed, pulled up behind, and left a respectful gap. The figure lifted a hand, all 5 fingers visible in the reflective tape glow, then tapped the rooftop once. The amber bar brightened and began a steady pulse. The pilot car rolled. He followed. They left the main line at a graded turnout. He'd never used a wide notch in the slope marked with a service access only placard he'd always assumed was for snowplows and people with keys. Cones created a lane that snaked along the mountain's shoulder, cleanly placed, not the lazy diamonds of a rushed operation, but deliberate, the spacing just so. Their collars were the older silver type, some scuffed dull, not the newer microprismatic wrap. He noticed it the way drivers notice everything, which is to say without thinking until later. The road narrowed into a shelf he hadn't known existed, a single lane with a low rock wall on the left and a concrete barrier on the right. The face of the mountain rose close, a dark plain that drank headlight and gave back only wet glints where the rock sweated. The pilot car's amber bar became a metronome in front of him. The CB hissed and then settled like it had taken a breath and decided against speaking. Signs appeared on the wall at measured intervals, white plates with black letters, distance to daylight 0.9 miles, then 0.9 again. He read the first, took note of the second, and let his mind file the mismatch a few drawers back. The sedan's brake lights came on for a bend, so tidy it could have been drawn with a compass. He matched the motion, trailer tracking smooth, glass riding quiet. He kept one eye on the pilot car and one on the edges. The barrier to the right bore old scuffs and a pair of faded paint lines at bumper height. Souvenirs of trucks that had let attention thin for a blink. Above the barrier, cut into the mountain itself, round vents spaced 20 yards apart, exhaled a cool, steady draft. No smoke, no dust, just clean air from a system, awake in the small hours. He noticed other odd things in the way a mind stacks small anomalies like coins. The font on the caution placards was a hair too tall. The chevron signs leaned in a shade more than necessary, and the pilot car had no plates. That might mean nothing. Plenty of official vehicles were exempt. But he couldn't place its make. Early 2000s? Late 92nds? The shape felt like something missing from a rental lot, the way a song feels familiar even when you can't hum a line. They passed a door in the mountain steel, with a number stenciled on it, 3B. A light above it glowed sodium orange, but the glass lens held a crack that the brain recognizes as long-aged rather than freshly chipped. A shadow moved behind the little pane of wire-reinforced glass, the kind used in utility spaces where standards are particular. The motion wasn't hurried, nor was it the shuffle of someone bored. It was a worker's motion, 3 steps and a turn, as if checking something that did not want to be dramatic. He blinked, and the shadow had gone. Or it was never quite what he thought. His dash clock ticked forward in the small way clocks do when they're being watched. The distance to daylight sign read 0.8, then 0.7, then 0.9 again. He made a sound in his throat that could have been a laugh if it had been louder. He was not afraid. He was paying attention. Those are not the same thing. Ahead, the sedan slowed, and the lane widened, passing a pullout with a blue-lighted phone and a sign, "In emergency, lift receiver." The pilot car rolled by without pause. He remembered suddenly a story from years ago. A driver in summer who swore he'd called a number on a blue phone under a ridge like this, and a voice had told him to wait where he was until dawn. The man had waited, and, in doing so, had missed a boulder the size of a compact car that crossed the lane at 70 and would have made an argument with anyone's luck. He filed that thought next to the font. He noticed the cones again. Some bore black marker initials near their bases, letters and numbers. D4-98. District 4 maybe. 1998. He drove another 30 seconds and saw, tucked against the rock, a triangle of high-vis fabric weighed by small stones, a kind of windsock without a pole. It lifted as the draft from his trailer passed, then relaxed as if relieved. The sedan's amber bar blinked twice, then settled into a long, slow rhythm, as if pacing a breath. He matched his spacing, looked left. A mural was painted on the rock, 5 figures in hard hats. Stylized but careful, the kind of art a road crew earns from a grateful county. Their faces were not distinct, but each was rendered with kindness. The paint was old, worn thin where water had traced it for years. He wanted to look longer. The pilot car crept, and he didn't allow himself the luxury. The mural slid away into dark. A new sign appeared, bolted to the barrier. "Keep right ventilation ahead." The air shifted cooler, washing through the grill, straight through, as if the mountain had a set of lungs and chose that moment to exhale. The draft carried the faintest smell of cut pine and cold dust. No oil, no diesel, nothing of a work zone. Clean, the way air is clean at the top of a morning. The CB flickered and caught a fragment from somewhere else, another highway. Wreck at the county line, keep left, then static. Then his own channel, suddenly alive. Anyone got info on Long Pine, heard the main line shut at the summit. He reached for the mic, thumbed the switch, and answered low. Pilot cars taking him through a side access. No backup behind. Silence answered. A patient kind. The sedan's brake lights blossomed again for another notch in the rock, and he dropped the mic back to its clip. Signs continued their soft confusion. Distance to daylight 0.6. Distance to daylight 0.8. A quiet suspicion took shape, not of danger, but of misalignment. The numbers might not belong to distance. They could belong to minutes, or to something else measured only here, with this wall and this barrier and this sedan that refused to show a license plate. The pilot car's bar flashed 3 times in a row, as if signaling a change. The lane widened to a curve that felt like stepping into a room. On the left, a high steel gate stood open, its hinges as thick as wrists. Beyond, a notch of sky, pale with starlight. The sedan's roof lights went lukewarm for a breath, then came bright again, and led him out into a space he knew by memory and surprise at the same time. He had exited onto a turnout he'd stopped at only once in daylight years ago, Butter Ridge Overlook. The vista spilled out brittle and exact. Far below, the main line traced the mountain, pinched, and then let go in a series of long S-curves. Just beyond one of those curves, a scatter of lights flared red and blue and white, the quiet frantic of emergency vehicles that are busy without being loud. Static on the radio offered names of agencies. Highway Patrol, County, Maintenance. A word came through twice. Steady, without heat. Slide. On the mountain's face above the lane, a long scar showed where rock had come down, neat as a part in hair. The headlamps of cars were stopped on both sides of the trouble, small constellations that had agreed to hold still. He eased his rig to a stop within the temporary lane, set the brake, and sat with his hands on the wheel because the habit of hands on the wheel is as strong as any superstition. The pilot car rolled forward just far enough to clear his bumper, and stopped with its amber bar still pulsing. The reflective jacketed figure did not step from the driver's side. The sedan's interior held a dark that rejected detail. He told himself to breathe normally and did. The CB chirped again. Long Pine closed eastbound at turnout 4. Expect delays. A driver answered somewhere in the chain. Copy that. Got flagged off before the last bend. Don't know where. But bless whoever waved the wand. Laughter that wasn't laughter followed. The kind of sound men make when they've been spared something they won't name directly. The Overlook had a small information board near the rock wall. He looked at it through the passenger window, the way one looks at menus through glass after hours. The board's paint had faded. The words were still legible. Dedicated to the Long Pine maintenance crew. District 4. Who kept this road open through storms and summer work. And a year that tried its level best to close it. Names followed, 5 of them. The year at the bottom was 1998. A metal emblem in the corner showed a cone and a hard hat inside a circle. A flower someone had left months ago had dried to something like paper. The pilot car's bar clicked off. The night took its shape back. Without the amber flash, the sedan looked like any older vehicle left idling in cold patient, not asking anything. He switched on his dome light and wrote a line in his log. He did not write the word detour. He wrote waiting, which was both true and easier to explain to a future reader who would only need to know miles and minutes. A voice crackled on the radio with authority that sounded like a checklist. Eastbound will open 1 lane for escorts in approximately 50. Standby instructions. Thank you for your patience. He glanced at the sedan. He would not need it by then. He knew that without being told. He sheened down the glass with the back of his hand, a useless motion against a clean window, and waited the way one waits for water to boil, not checking any more often than would make time combative. While he waited, he noticed more of the Overlook than he had in years. The rock wall bore small plaques, each a year when crews had kept the pass open for a record stretch. The end of the low wall held a bronze set of raised lines that indicated mountains for someone's fingers to read. He looked up and saw Orion, slanted toward the horizon, leaving for the season. He didn't feel watched. He felt accompanied. The way a driver sometimes does when the world outside the glass tells him he is not stubbornly alone in a place meant only for engines and paint. Then, all at once, the sedan's amber bar lit again, and the aero board back along the temporary lane snapped to life within a makings. Old warm glow. Follow me, it announced in bulbs that warmed through dull to bright. The pilot car rolled. He released the brake, set the truck ambling behind. The lane skirted another face of rock he hadn't considered, could have a road on it. He had the odd sense that the sedan traveled on memory, not on pavement. His own tires happened to find the same line because the world had been made in a way that allowed it. They joined the main line past the scar. The scene he'd seen from above lived down here as a careful dance of reflective vests and hands, speaking the language of traffic. A man in a newer jacket saluted him with a raised palm, not to stop, but as a sign that they understood each other's jobs. The pilot car drifted to the shoulder, slowed, and let him pass. He kept a steady pace. He did not look into the sedan as he went by. He wished the driver well. He did not say the words. The first open mile felt longer than it was. He re-entered the night song of the truck, the whir of tires, the slight rush under the door seals, the breathing of the engine itself. He checked the mirrors out of habit. The amber bar behind him winked twice and went dark. The lane took him down, through a stand of black pine that cut the wind, past a snow gate standing open like a proposition suspended. He had the thought, ridiculous and perfect, that if he were to pull into a rest area and check the county's website, there would be a note, no overnight operations on Long Pine tonight. He left the thought alone. He did not need it corrected or confirmed. The rest of the trip unwound without asking for attention. He delivered glass that still looked like rain, counted his straps with the kind of relief only someone who counts straps for a living knows. At a diner where the booths had seen better vinyl decades, he took a counter seat and ate eggs in the way of someone who appreciates warmth for its own sake. A driver 2 stools down told a short story about the pass. How a friend once got sent around on a work road in the middle of a storm and ended up an hour behind schedule, but an hour spared something worse. Said there wasn't a crew signed on that night, the driver finished, stirring his coffee. Said they left cones out though, like good manners. Days later, he crossed Long Pine again in daylight. The wind was curious but not rude. At the overlook, he saw the face of the plaque again and read the 5 names slowly, the way one reads names on a team roster and imagines who sat where in the truck. Off to the side, there were cones stacked 3 high, their collars dull with age, their rubber faded to the color of sunrise. An aero board sat folded with its legs tucked up, the bulbs dark and dusty. As he watched, a cloud's shadow crossed the face of the board, and a suggestion of amber rippled across it, the way the idea of light sometimes moves across a closed eye. He put 2 fingers on the rim of the wheel and breathed the mountain's pace. On the far slope, fresh wire netting hung where the scar had been. New anchors set like stitches said someone had worked long after the sirens stopped. He rolled on, and as he passed the turnout where the service access joined the lane, if there was such a place in daylight, he flicked his hazard lights twice in the simple private language drivers sometimes use. Seen you? Thank you. Moving on. For months afterward, when amber boards spoke, he heard something new in their warm bulbs' patience maybe. Direction given without the insult of hurry. If a lane closed and a pilot car asked him to follow, he did it with the ease of someone who had decided to say yes to every courtesy that made a night kinder. And if a lane stayed open and everything looked perfect, he still glanced at the edges of the dark, the places where a door might be, and a hand might lift with 5 fingers showing, a baton low, a motion that asked not for anything dramatic, only for care. He never saw the yellow sedan again. He did not expect to. That felt correct. He did learn the names by heart on the plaque, without quite trying. On a different route, a different mountain, he noticed initials on cones another district with their own year peeking through marker that had bled into plastic. He nodded once to nobody, checked his spacing, and let the grade write itself under him like a line from a song he hadn't known he knew until he heard it again. He kept a bottle of water behind the passenger seat from then on, not for himself, but because it felt right to have one extra. Once, parked at Butter Ridge in daylight on a slow afternoon, he set that bottle on the low wall beneath the bronze contour map and rested his hand on it for a second. No one saw. No one needed to. He left it there. The breeze lifted just enough to move the leaf of a small plant, growing from a crack in the stone. He climbed back in, checked his mirrors, and smiled faintly at the idea of an aero board warming through its bulbs somewhere out of sight. Getting ready to tell someone not to be brave, but to be gentle, which most of the time is harder and smarter and enough. Story number 4. The plains held the night like a big, quiet lake flat, reflective, and steady under a long sky. He ran a reefer loaded with citrus, the trailer a cool room humming along behind him, its small, steady engine keeping a promise to fruit that had left a grove 2 days ago and would arrive bright and patient at dawn. The cab smelled faintly of orange peel and diesel soap. The road unrolled like tape. Far off, towers blinked red at sedate intervals, not warning so much as nodding. You're seen. Keep going. He tuned the radio because it kept the cab from turning inward. AM stations drifted in and out, the way they do after midnight sports scores from a city that felt like a rumor. Weather warnings for counties he would not step foot in. A preacher whose voice carried a long distance, simply because night air carries sound like a gift. He let the dial wander. It landed on a frequency that didn't appear on his usual mental map. 730. The display on the dash read 0729, and then clicked to 0730 like it had remembered the number rather than found it. A warm, low voice filled the cab, and the first thing it said was his lane number. Good to have you in the outside lane along County 6, the voice said, friendly without being familiar. Lights are steady. You're making time. For everyone rolling north past Redwater, you've got a light crosswind, no gusts above 20, and to whoever moved that cooler off the shoulder near mile 102 earlier, thanks for keeping the road clean. He glanced at his mirror. The outside lane he occupied looked like any lane under a quiet sky. He had moved a blue cooler an hour back, A harmless act turned a little odd by a voice that could have been guessing or could have seen him through a window he didn't know was open. He waited for the tell that would make it ordinary. An ad, a station ID, a laugh that named a city, Night Window Radio. The voice said a beat later, as if he had asked, "Serving what people do after 11, from the center of nowhere to the edge of anywhere. You're listening on 730, Night Window." It felt right, a name for the view in front of his hood at this hour. He eased his grip a notch, kept his foot just where it belonged, and let the station be company. A soft guitar played under the voice, the kind of music that sounds like it respects both silence and motion. "Coming up," the voice continued. "A quick update for Route 43 northbound debris in the left lane near the old salt plant. Stay center. And for the driver with the green thermos in the dash cup holder, you're fine on fuel. Skip Rivermouth's cheap pump. It's card. Only tonight, and the terminal's down. Next open is Silver Cross, and the coffee's passable." His thermos was green. That could be luck. The pump advice wasn't what a commercial would offer. It sounded like something a friend would say from another cab up the road. He did not speed up or slow down. He watched the painted line and held to it, because that was the job. The station ran a spot of sorts, an advertisement from another time. "Turn in at Bluebird Court for clean rooms, fresh linens, and a hot breakfast. Bluebird Court, since 1974, exit 19. He smiled despite himself. Bluebird had shut years ago. He'd seen the sign warping under sun, the letters peeled down to bones. Still, the way the words rested in his ear made the place briefly real. Beds turned down, a desk bell that sounded like a coin falling. An hour slipped by in the old AM way, the signal breathing a little when the terrain rolled, the voice adjusting as if the studio itself leaned into one corner to keep balance. The warnings it offered were small, accurate. A ladder lay in the median where the station said it would, silver and embarrassed. Two deer eyed the shoulder at mile 116, their ears classical triangles against the world, exactly where the voice had let him know not to be surprised. None of it felt supernatural. It felt like helpful coincidence stacked enough times to make a shape. He tried to pin the station to a place. The call sign refused to be said out loud. "Night Window," the voice would say, and leave it there. The way a room with no clock still has a sense of time. Between advisories, the voice told short stories about roads built with one good idea and a handful of borrowed money, about a diner that served the same soup every Wednesday and became famous in 3 counties for the consistency of that choice, about a dog who learned to ride a wrecker's passenger seat and wave goodnight with a paw from a lowered window. The stories slid under the night without pushing against it. Then the voice said something with the soft emphasis one puts on a detail that matters. "For drivers in the flats between 140 and 150, you'll see temporary detour signs pointing down to the river access. Those are left over from yesterday's parade. Stay straight. Trust the paint, not the plywood." He reached the section with the detour boards a few minutes later. They were the cheap kind, the letters cut from vinyl, a brace holding them up against a willing wind. An arrow pointed off toward the river lot. He could see why someone might follow it in daylight when the brain is curious and the idea of a change is pleasant. He stayed true to the lane. Ahead, a set of taillights in a small box truck, clean, unbranded, flicked, signaled left, started to drift toward the boards. He tapped the air horn twice, friendly, not chastising. The box truck corrected, settled back into line, and lifted a hand out the window, a square of palm that meant, "Got it, thanks." He drove on, and the detour boards did what they do best when ignored, stayed still, tried no more tricks. "Good catch," the voice said later, not to him, not in the way a person on a phone would congratulate. It delivered the comment into the space of the cab like a thing that had been true before words were attached to it. Folks forget how far plywood can boss a person around. He laughed quietly. The sound came out like a sigh. Across the high prairie, a spatter of low fog found shallow ground. It slid into hollows and drifted out again. Never so dense as to hide anything, just enough to make the night admit it had layers. The station introduced callers. Not with names, callers were locations, weather tastes, road noises. "We've got a friend from the split by Shaw Ridge who says his odometer has been counting yards instead of miles. If that's you, pull off and check your tire pressure. Don't argue with a reading too small to make obvious sense. We're hearing from someone out on the 2-lane past Mill Hooks, about a cow that doesn't know fences or rules. If you drive that way, give your horn a good, patient press by the bend in the tall grass. The cow respects gentle suggestion. A woman called from somewhere with a wind that she said sounds like wires singing. The voice told her to drop a gear, ease back, and not to take pride to the crown of the road. A man laughed in a way that wasn't laughter, and told about a billboard blinking a number that made strong coffee free if you pressed redial twice. The host told him, kindly, not to dial anything focused on coffee these days, because coffee wanted to be paid for, or it grew moody. The callers sounded like his people fatigued, generous without ceremony, wired to tell on themselves if it might help someone else save 5 minutes or 5 feet. He didn't call. The advice in his industry was old and plain, and lived to one side of superstition. Do not announce yourself more than necessary. Leave room for the road to forget you when you need it to. He kept his hands on the wheel, reset the cruise for a long incline just by feel, sipped at the thermos, and let the station do what it was doing. When the hour turned, the display on the radio clicked down an increment, as if an unseen hand used an old mechanical knob. Top of the hour, Night Window said. For those just joining, you're with us on 730, listening over the salt, under the sky. Here's your careful list. Frost on bridges by the horse farm. A trooper in the median just past the last rumor of a town. A mattress in lane 2 near the last Boardman exit mattresses are always embarrassed to be found like that, and an abandoned sedan on the shoulder with its hazards working. Do not stop. It has already been called in, and the driver is warm in a patrol car a mile ahead. He could see that car soon after. Hazards polite, trunk full of ordinary life, a cruiser lit like a small party. He passed, and the cruiser's light touched his trailer's aluminum, and then let it go. The show took a break for news that carried no cities. Grain prices in abstract. A promise of cooler air sliding down from a place with glaciers. Then music, an old instrumental, that made a person think of 2-lane roads where crop-dusting planes turned around over fields. Out of the music came an ad that wasn't an ad. Not anymore. Aunt Dolly's pie. Open late. Coconut cream till we run out. Aunt Dolly's. Exit 4. Where the neon flickers an apology and the coffee's hot enough to be a decision. He'd eaten at Aunt Dolly's as a young hand with more energy than caution. The place had closed a decade on, but the announcement moved through the cab, as if time could be convinced to turn its ankle and stumble long enough to make one more slice possible. His phone sat with a dark screen that held his reflection in double. He clicked it on once to check a message from dispatch that contained nothing but a route number and a thumbs up. He put it face down, knowing it would startle him with unnecessary light if a new message arrived at an odd hour. He let the show shape the night instead. The inquiry came direct but not demanding. We're opening a line, the voice said. If you're rolling north with Citrus and listening on 730, you're welcome to say hello. Don't need a name. You can tell us the road without telling us you. Everyone else benefits. He leaned his elbow on the window just enough to find pressure without weight. He imagined picking up the phone, or the mic, or whatever the mechanism might be. He imagined saying something plain. I hear you. Then he felt the old, practical caution. It had kept him correct through years of weather, incomprehensible signage, and a map that sometimes reinvented itself between seasons. He didn't need to say hello to prove his existence to anyone, especially a voice that had demonstrated it knew he was there without a phonetic alphabet. Maybe next hour, the host said into his silence, unbothered. All good. You're doing fine. At mile 162, he saw the radio tower. It rose off to the right, a dark skeleton against a slightly lighter sky, the top studded with aviation red that did not glow. At its base crouched a small building, cinder block with a low roof, the kind that sheds weather by refusing to be dramatic. No lights showed in its windows. The gravel lot looked neat, no weeds through it, as if someone came by to pull them before they had the chance to embarrass the idea of an operating facility. As he drew alongside, the signal swelled a notch, but not much. The sound of the station did not care if a tower stood or fell, if a building's lights were on, or if a person sat behind glass with headphones and a lamp. It came from the night and lived in it like fog, the way AM does, bouncing off invisible layers, pooled in folds of geography, turned eloquent by mere distance. A call drifted on that made his shoulders change angle. A man's quiet voice described a strange feeling at a way station, the kind of discomfort that belongs more to the mind than to the axle scale. He said the sign had promised open, and the windows were lit, and the officer inside had waved him on. But the printer cabinet had held a calendar from 1986, and the certificate on the wall had named a director whose name he'd recognized from a driver's Hall of Fame plaque. The host answered in the tone of someone helping another person set a jar down gently. If it's clean, if your paperwork prints new, you're fine. If it offers you a clipboard with a 6-digit phone number and you don't see anyone else parked, keep rolling. We love the past, but we don't build our routes there. He passed an open prairie lot where a sign once promised pie. The lot held only 2 gravely mounds and the memory of neon. The radio did not pretend it sat there anymore. It gave directions that belonged to the present and kept its nostalgia in little songs and old slogans that acted like lullabies. Near 2 a.m., wind slid under the trailer and felt for its edges like a careful hand. The station said, "Light chop on the open water. Keep your speed where you can hold it with a breath." He reduced 1 mile per hour because the idea of a breath-deciding speed made him smile, and because he trusted whoever chose those words. Then the show did something different. The voice, which had maintained a precise distance from particular people while sounding like it held every driver in a gentle inventory, turned close in the way one turns a lamp towards a page. For the driver in the white tractor with a scuffed bumper and a small charm on the mirror, it said, "You'll be tempted to exit at Beecher's Field when you see 3 quick green lights ahead. It will look like kindness. The exit will be signed for a detour that has already ended. Stay on the main line. You're fine." His bumper had taken its share of lot kisses. A small charm hung from the mirror ahead too, a leftover from someone he missed who had never ridden in this truck and yet visited it by means of a tiny brass shape. He had never said the charm's name aloud while alone. He would not now. He watched the mile makers, the far sky, the possibility of green flickers. An overpass ahead bore 3 traffic signals for intersecting county roads, close, enough that their cycles lined up in short bursts of synchronized green. For a moment, the world offered him perfect permission to change course. He let the permission pass and stayed put. The main line held him as if he had chosen it only once long ago and was simply honoring that decision again. A low ridge approached, and on it, a billboard advertised a radio show he'd never heard before. The paint was new. The font was modern. The billboard named a sunrise program that would begin at 5. He knew he could switch later and hear a person chuckle at their own jokes and read scores from games that ended hours back and announce a charity run over the weekend. Night Window slipped under that future like a hand under a blanket. "We'll sign off where we began," the host said, the voice as even as it had been at the start. No credits, no names, just road and attention. "One more thing. If you hear your name come over any frequency at this time of night, let it go like water on glass. Names are heavy. Weight belongs on axle groups, not on a person's ears." It didn't threaten. It suggested. He had no desire to test it. He had watched names get stuck to people like burrs, and he preferred his to be the kind that only appeared on forms and fuel receipts and, occasionally, the way a counterperson says it back off a card so they can hand it to the right hand. He drove on. He stopped once for fuel because the math said he could, and the math also said he would be happier if he did. The travel center was bright and wide awake, in a way that made it feel like it belonged to its own time zone. The clerk poured a coffee with the efficiency of someone who has watched sunrise make new maps across faces for years. He asked, as if asking about weather, "You ever hear Night Window?" The clerk looked up. The question wasn't odd. Not in this world where certain phrases still fit into conversations like coins in old slots. "My stepdad used to swear by it," the clerk said. Said it got him around a mess on Route 9 when the radio tower was out and the signs were wrong. Said the tower used to be out near Beecher's. They took it down after an ice storm in '83, and he kept hearing it 2-3 times a year anyway. Said the trick was never tell them your name. Said that made the signal stay nice. He smiled with his mouth and his eyes the way some smiles do, took the coffee he had already paid for, and turned back toward the truck. The night outside pushed on the glass doors gently, a steady, thoughtful presence waiting its turn. Back in the cab, he set the coffee where the thermos had been earlier, checked the reefer's readout, listened to its hum, and tuned the radio back to where the decimals had been. Night Window's guitar came first, then the voice. One more loop of road wisdom, small and clean. Don't tuck in behind doubles when you feel the wind get playful. Give yourself that space. And if a station offers to read you a list of people by their names after midnight, find music or static instead. He passed Beecher's Field in the last hour before daylight. That time when the sky behind you begins to glow while the world ahead insists it's still night. The field was not a field anymore. It was a fenced lot with equipment asleep on it, and a small shack where a motion sensor blinked, not sure what counted as motion. In the fence beyond, two birds perched on the lower rung of an old transmission tower that rose like the skeleton of a thought. He clicked his hazards twice, a habit he had lately for saying a quiet hello to anything that had helped without asking for receipts. The station signed off around the time the horizon admitted a color other than blue. No fanfare, no jingle. The guitar faded. The voice said, "See you next long night," and the frequency slid into gentle static that sounded like it had always been there underneath. He turned the volume down to the part of the dial where the numbers are only a suggestion, and the truck's own song took over. Tire. Motor. A faint whistle from the driver's side mirror. When the wind got picky. In daylight, news radio took possession of the band. He let it tell him about small things that mattered to people who didn't measure their day in miles. A school opening late, a county fair announced early, a story about a dog found after a storm, the same dog perhaps that had waved from a wrecker in the night somewhere else entirely. Night Window felt less like something that had happened, and more like something the night could do if you were polite to it. Days later, with the citrus gone and a box of clean pallets for the return to the yard, he rolled through a different stretch of flats. The sky had that big daytime look that makes a man feel lighter, simply because the ceiling of the world is higher. He tuned across AM out of habit. For a breath, between the hum of a foreign sports station and a commentary that belonged to a city on the other side of the continent, he caught a few words from the voice he recognized. For the driver who didn't call his name Good Choice, it said, "Not smug, just matter of fact. There's time for introductions when the sun does half the talking. Out here now. Let the machine have the weight." He didn't answer, couldn't have even if he'd wanted to. He wasn't asked to. He felt the faint shift of a reefer engine cycling and the little correction of weight that came with it, and marveled again that a person could move thousands of pounds with patience and a foot and a sense of who he was when no one else was in the cab to do the naming. He kept listening on other nights out of interest, not obligation. Sometimes Night Window found him, sometimes it didn't. When it did, he accepted small advice and small stories the way one accepts a refill from a stranger who pours correctly without comment. When it didn't, the night was still generous stars above, taillights ahead like slow constellations, the clean line of a horizon that took whatever a person said into it and made it part of a longer sentence. Eventually, on a stretch of county road where dust turned weather under a set of liquid amber sunset clouds, he passed a historical marker with an illustration of a tower. The plaque told of a station that broadcast to farms and fences and late-night roads, the tower felled by ice in a winter that taught everyone to carry spare blankets whether they ever needed them or not. He slowed out of respect because it felt right to, and because the past had offered him a night's easy passage and asked in return only that he keep his own name in his pocket until morning. That felt like a trade worth making. Story number 5. He had taken the detour because the interstate wore a necklace of flashing blue and red up ahead, and the overhead signs blinked closed in square white letters that made their own wind. Dispatch sent a quick route adjustment that looked like it had been pulled out of a drawer no one had opened in years. County roads, farm to market, names instead of numbers for a few miles, river cutoff, Old Pike, Fairton Lane. He hauled an empty flatbed back to the yard, chains coiled like sleeping snakes, binders stowed clean. Empty made the truck feel springy, but the steering still asked for a hand like water, asks for the right cup. He liked the quiet of a deadhead run when it happened under an honest night. The air out there smelled of hay and fresh earth turned over last week. Telephone poles ticked by like a slow metronome, and the stars hung so low they could have been tapped with the mirror if he stood on the seat and reached up. He found the first turn, with the kind of relief that comes from a sign exactly where the sheet says it will be. OLD Pike, it announced without flourish. The asphalt went narrow, double yellow tight together, white edge lines half remembered by the county's paint truck. He dropped a gear and let the engine hum in that steady register that made the cab feel like a room with its own heartbeat. No other taillights, no headlights coming, only fence post shadows, a barn roof leaning back to look at the moon, and that feeling that everything out there had a life separate from him and was fine with his passing through as long as he minded his edges. The first hint of something odd arrived like good manners. Up ahead, around a bend cut between two cottonwoods, a string of small, warm bulbs began to glow and then ducked out of view again. Incandescent, he thought automatically, not the sharp modern LEDs. The light looked like a kitchen left on after a party, not a work zone. He rolled closer and rounded the bend. A line of trucks occupied the lane in front of him, moving 28, maybe 30. They weren't freight. They weren't modern. They were painted the deep colors of old enamel maroon, midnight blue, dark bottle green, with gold leaf lettering scrolled across doors and trailer sides. Midway. Golden Wheel Shows. Hightower Amusements. The paint was worn where hands would have touched, glossy in places like new pennies, dulled in others like coins that had lived in a single pocket for years. The trailers were short and square, oak and steel, with sideboards and canvas tarps tied down with rope that threw little shadows like neat handwriting. One truck carried a little ticket booth with hand-painted stars. Another hauled something tall under canvas that suggested a carousel, the top of a horse lifted in profile for a blink as the tarp settled, its painted eye patient and a little amused. They had their own lights rigged, little bulbs along the edges of the trailers, warm and steady, the kind a person could fix with a screwdriver and a spare. The taillights winked, with a rhythm that belonged to mechanical flashers. No hazard bars, no LED strobes. An amber beacon on a lead truck swept like a lighthouse that trusted patience more than power. He slowed to match their pace, because passing on Old Pike was less a suggestion and more a bad idea. And because the line curved in a way that made any attempt at bravado feel like lighting a match next to a curtain. He reached for the CB on reflex. Static, then a private laugh between two drivers many miles off. No talk about a carnival convoy. No. Got a slow mover on Old Pike. He set the mic down without keying it. The convoy held steady, and he put his truck at a respectful distance, low beams painting a pale trapezoid over canvas and oak. The carnival trucks moved with a care that didn't feel like hesitation. They knew where the road didn't quite stay flat, where the rail crossing bit harder than its size, where a culvert's lip would kick a tire if approached too fast. The lead truck's driver offered hand signals not out the window, but through the back glass, a gloved hand lifted, palm open, as if counting off the bend carefully. On top of the glove, he caught the glow of a lantern set on the dash, its ring catching light, then not. No radios visible, no reflective tape. Nevertheless, a competence rolled off them like heat above a griddle. They slowed at a one-lane bridge and paused. The sign before it declared 15 tons max, and below that, in paint that had flaked into memory, local traffic only. He considered weight without needing a number. Empty flatbed, tractor, full tanks, he would make it with room to spare. The lead truck eased forward and laid its wheels into places where the planks had known wheels before. The sound the bridge made was not a complaint. It was the kind of creak a farmhouse gives in winter. I am doing what I was built to do. The convoy rolled over, slow, then slower for a heart's beat, then through, and he moved in their shadow, the river below drinking the starlight, and giving back only a suggestion that it kept moving without him. He looked for license plates. Some bore metal ovals with numbers pressed into them that did not resemble anything current. One had a plate that read 1,976 inches, a font his mind slid past and cataloged as "Not Today." He told himself there were film shoots that did this kind of thing. He told himself there were enthusiasts who restored entire ways of moving from other times. He kept those explanations lined up like bolts in a drawer, easy to reach, and yet he did not reach for them. The night was doing the job of itself perfectly. He let it. They passed a farmhouse whose porch light clicked on, and then off again as if the switch had stuck, and then relented. He saw a figure behind a window shade, the angle of a head that suggested someone told a short story to someone else in that room. And the story included a mention of trucks like these, and a few words about how they used to come through after midnight to set up on the green by morning. He rolled by, and the house held its own thoughts. The convoy turned at a corner where the sign had lost its letters and kept only a habit of pointing. He followed, mostly because Old Pike didn't offer much in the way of going anywhere, except where the people with old knowledge went, and partly because the lead truck's lantern hand rose and pointed, and the gesture felt like an invitation to a common sense he already shared. A smell reached him that made the hair on his arms rise, and then lie down again. Sweet oil, cotton cord, canvas that had been wet and then dried in sun. A trace of sugar cooked to soft stage. It was not present the way steam is present. It hung like a memory in a room that had just been dusted. He smiled and shook his head, a small movement that did not shift the wheel. People think they grow out of certain memories. Sometimes the road hands them back like a polite clerk with good manners. They came to a halt, not abruptly, but with certainty. The lead truck stopped at a crossroad where a set of floodlights, most likely used for harvest nights, stood dark on poles. Beyond, the main road he'd planned to take ran left to right, a wider stripe of asphalt with its own double yellow fat with paint. It glowed faintly the way well-traveled roads glow at night, holding the light of a moon well. On that main road, red taillights stood still in both directions, a long string of quiet punctuation. Farther off, a watchful blue rotated without hurry at the horizon's edge. A closure. He had been right to detour. He had probably been luckier than he realized. The lead truck's door opened. A man set a boot on the step and looked out, not back. He wore a cap with a short brim and an old coat that held a shape of labor, even while hanging still. The man lifted one hand 5 fingers up, then curled them slowly in, down to a point. Wait. He did not motion to come forward. He did not point him away. The gesture was a kind of shared pause. He sat with his foot steady on the brake and watched the main road's distant patience. He reached for the CB again. Someone else reported a barn fire over off to the east. A long structure, no injuries, volunteer department already on it. That accounted for the rotation of blue, and a reason for the closure that did not need more detail. He breathed, then let out breath. Folks would be fine. Folks were often fine when people did what they knew to do, and did it together. The man at the door shut it gently, like he was closing a cupboard with light china inside. The lead truck inched forward and took a cut onto a lane he hadn't noticed, thin as a crease, one of those channels beside the road that are part memory, part county easement. It led downward, parallel to the main road, between 2 lines of young trees whose trunks flashed white with paint for the first few feet above the ground. The rest of the convoy followed. Wheels finding places on dirt that had accepted similar tires for a long time. He noticed, only once he had begun to turn, a small wooden sign at the lane's elbow, hand-lettered, hung on wire. Fairgrounds. They rolled slow down between 2 rows of old maples, canopies arched above like a nave. The light from his headlights and their warm bulbs painted leaves a thoughtful green. At the end of the lane, a wide rectangle opened a field worn to short grass, a gravel oval for parking, a line of booths under a long roof, their shutters closed with latches that nobody had hammered in years. A gate, wrought iron, short enough for a kid to climb, bore a name across its arch in curving letters, Hollow Creek Fair. He had stopped here once with his father, on a day that had smelled like pencil shavings and hot dogs. He had held a string attached to a balloon that pulled at his hand softly, like an animal that wished things could be otherwise. He shut that memory away the way a man puts back a drawer that he opened by accident while looking for something else. The convoy didn't need sentiment from him. It needed him to watch and learn. They rolled along the edge of the oval. The truck with the covered carousel idled beside a long set of poles where banners would have run. One of the other trucks, this one painted blue ribbon treats, along a side panel, turned neatly and backed into a line, as if the driver had painted the marks on the ground themselves. No beeps, no guides on radios, no waving of arms. Distance was judged in inches by someone who did that sort of math by feel. As the truck straightened, the bulbs along its side hummed with a subtle change in tone, like a breath in. A few moths stirred near the nearest light, surprised to find a lamp available. He checked his clock. The minute hand had not run away on him. He had not lost time. He had not gained any either. The night was doing what nights do. He did a walk-around out of both habit and respect. Empty flatbed wheels looked fine. The chains lay as he had laid them. He touched a binder just to lend hand to thought. Dry. He rolled his shoulders, got back in. A metal board near the gate held flyers under clouded plastic. He turned his headlamp down and read only what the moon made possible. Hollow Creek Harvest Fair, the topmost sheet announced. Dates listed across a range that ended long ago. Thursday pie auction. Friday tractor pull. Saturday night, Golden Wheel shows. A small tear had lifted the corner of the sheet, and beneath it another announced, "Group rate coupons available at bank." Ink bled at the edges like paper that had learned what time does and didn't mind. The convoy didn't unload. That felt important. They parked with the backs of their trailers to the booths, lights arching the edge of the gravel, and went still the way good machinery goes still, ready without bragging. Somewhere in the line, a small tune drifted the hint of a calliope not playing so much as warming its pipes. The sound a person might hear when standing outside a tent where someone tested the keys under their breath. It stopped before his brain could find the melody. He felt no pull to go look. He felt, instead, a request to wait. He honored it. He sat and watched the main road beyond the trees as it did what main roads do, handled a problem without asking for applause. The blue light slowed its turning and then dimmed. The string of taillights began to move in segments, then in a slow unspooling, until the far pieces joined the nearer in a river of motion again. The lantern inside the lead truck lifted and set down, its hand, or the shadow of one, acknowledging a schedule of the world that did not require a name. When the convoy started moving, it did so with that same lack of noise. The lead truck rolled first, the amber beacon awake, the bulbs along the sides breathing in and out. The carousel under the tarp suggested motion without offering any. They passed him by his driver's side door, and this time, when the lead truck went by, he looked at the face of the man in the cab. He saw it the way one sees a person across a room, and knows they could describe the shape of the features later but might, in a month, tell the story as if it were a painting. Cap bill, lines at the corners of the mouth that belonged to years spent outdoors, eyes that looked ahead with the intent that comes from doing something you love without needing to say you love it. The man lifted 2 fingers from the wheel driver's language. "For I see you." He returned the gesture, small, equal. He pulled in behind them as they left the fairgrounds through the far gate, not the one they entered, and drifted onto a cut that returned them to Old Pike. The main road now flowed to his right, a long slither of polite white. A sign he didn't remember noticing before pointed to the freeway with an arrow that compared a distance in tenths. He kept to the tail of the line because at some point, what one begins with one person, one finishes with the same. It felt right to stay until they told him otherwise. At the last bend before the on-ramp, the convoy slowed. The lead truck moved to the shoulder and idled. One by one, as if breaking a spell quietly, the rest of the line eased to the gravel, bulbs steady. He tapped his brake twice, slid left, and glided past. He put his hand up in that same 2-finger thanks. In his mirror, the lantern's glow leaned toward his lane for the time it took a breath to do its job, and then leaned back. He took the ramp. The freeway received him with its wide comfort and its noise, and its sense that one person doesn't matter, and also matters entirely if they choose to matter to themselves. He merged and brought the truck up to a speed that felt honestly in the grain of him. He checked his clock. He was not behind. He was not ahead. He was exactly where he needed to be. At the next break, a small travel center with a postcard rack that hadn't been restocked since a logo change, he stepped in for coffee. The clerk had the look of people who have watched more kinds of tired than a textbook can list. He asked without preamble, tone light. "Fare come through tonight?" The clerk glanced up like a bird, quick and interested. "You saw him?" she said. Not incredulous, just warmed by the idea. They do that every so often when the interstate acts up. My granddad swore they used to roll at night so the ride'd be up by noon. He swore a lot of things. She slid the coffee across, added, as if giving clear directions. "Fairground down Token Hill's been closed since before me. Still keeps the sign polished. Folks leave stuff on the board. If you need a clean path when the big road gets clever about being closed, those folks know the old cuts." He took his coffee, the lid fitting with the long, shy click of a good seal, and walked back into a night that had learned 2 things about him. He would follow slow, when slow knew what it was doing, and he could keep a secret from his mouth without feeling like he'd swallowed a coin. The freeway under his tires felt modern again, with its LED everything and its perfect reflectors, the white of them pure as fresh paper. He fell back into the clean line of it, comforted by the noise that meant other people were out there doing their shifts, taking their turns, speaking their small languages. In daylight a week later, he happened to be nearby with time to stretch his legs. He turned down the lane with the young trees and parked by the gate. Hollow Creek Fair, arched above with its neat letters. The metal board held the old flyers. A new edition, printed in this decade, laminated carefully, announced Community Picnic Bring Your Own Chair. Someone had stuck a small sticker near the corner in the shape of a carousel horse with a blue blanket. He smiled. Grass had grown around the base of the ticket booth to the height of his shin, as if the building had been standing there forever and had no quarrel with the idea. He walked the oval once and stood at the spot where he had parked that night. A moth batted against a beam of sunlight in the shade under the grandstand roof, unbothered by him. The place was not haunted in the way stories scare people. It was inhabited with a quiet that felt like a fold in a blanket one made when someone gets up and leaves a warm shape behind for a minute. He left the fairground the way he had arrived, respectful of edges, soft-voiced without having spoken once. That evening, on another road, he found himself behind a different slow mover, a farm combine taking up most of the lane, lights like a constellation, and a pilot truck waving ahead. He tucked in and stayed. He watched the pilot's arm signal, the pilot's brake lights, the pilot's careful way of glancing back without making it a big thing. He remembered the glove lifted through a back window and the lantern glow, and realized that sometimes the old ways and the new ones tell exactly the same story. This is the pace. It's enough. You'll get there if you show patience the courtesy of acting like you've met before. He never saw the carnival convoy again. He didn't make a habit of looking for it, because looking is the kind of pressure certain things don't respond to. When he did take Old Pike after that, he noticed scrape marks on the one-lane's planks that he could convince himself were from any truck at all. He noticed moths whose whole job seemed to be to swing once around a forgotten bulb and settle. He noticed he had added 2 seconds to the speed in his head that equaled calm. At dawn on a morning months later, a song came on a tinny radio in a cafe near a terminal. An old waltz played on a wheezing instrument that someone called a calliope in the caption of a black and white photo on the wall. The photo showed a line of trucks painted deep colors, parked in a circle under a grandstand. He took his breakfast and sat by the picture, and looked at the gold leaf scrollwork around the letters. He did not point. He did not tell the server with the tired wrists anything about a night on a deadhead run when he followed slow lights into a fairground and out again. He left a tip, got back in his truck, did his post-trip with the precision of someone who values the moments when things are still and the moments when they move, and when he pulled onto the road, he let someone merge, and someone let him, and the little economy of the highway took a breath, spent it wisely, and kept going, which is the most anyone can ask of a night, a road, or a line of trucks that remembered bright, and carried it carefully forward without ever needing to say why. Story number 6. The desert at night didn't go black. It went silver. The highway rode a pale line through scrub and low hills, and far away the sky kept a low glow that could have been a town, or a memory of one. He hauled pallets of bottled water heavy, honest freight that didn't shift if the straps were respectful. The trailer hummed only in the way air hums around edges. Wind walked the flats in long, slow pushes that made the sagebrush bend like patience nodding off. He'd topped off in Barrow Flats and pointed east toward the long quiet. The dash clock said it was that hour when the body starts to bargain, and the road answers by offering routine. Scan left mirror, scan right, check gauges, glance at the horizon, breathe. The CB murmured 2 counties away. Low talk about fuel prices and a trooper sitting tall near a mile marker he'd pass after the moon had made more sense of the sky. He turned the volume down until the static sounded like the memory of rain. Past a sign that promised next services in a distance that required math, the first ring came. It wasn't loud. It was soap bubble delicate, a sound from childhood kitchens and waiting rooms. He felt it more than he heard it, a single bright tone, then silence. He reached for his phone without thinking. The screen stayed dark. It wasn't the dash, no indicator lit, no soft chime for a door ajar or a slow leak somewhere he didn't have. The tone seemed to come from outside the cab, so faint it could have been his imagination, except that his imagination didn't sound like a payphone in a movie from 1985. He passed a blue post at the shoulder, chest high, topped with a small solar panel and a weathered box. The reflective sticker on it had once read, "Call Box," in block letters. Now it read, "Call BX." The missing letters scuffed away by sun, sand, and other useful weathers. As his lights touched it, the box open, empty, caught a glimmer. He didn't slow. He told himself he had heard the wind find the right angle in the right crack at the right moment and make a tone. The desert does wind tricks. He accepted that answer and filed the strange pleasure of hearing a sound from a different decade. Somewhere behind his next mirror check, 2 miles later, the tone rang again. Same bright chime, same restraint, as if whoever was at the other end had long ago learned not to let a sound be a demand. He looked for a post and found one in his beam, another blue, another small, crooked solar panel, another emptied-out box with a faded instruction plate promising help in polite capital letters that now pointed you to a number instead of a button. He drove by and the sound went with him, 1 beat behind the speed of the truck, like a shadow that had decided it was funnier to lead than to follow. He tested things without quite admitting that's what he was doing. He clicked the radio to a random station. A preacher filled the cab with a voice warm and hopeful about a community pancake breakfast at a church he would never visit. The ring didn't come in over the speakers. He cracked the window for air. The ring did not sharpen as if the sound lived outside. It stayed right at the edge of belief. The third one came at mile 84, and this time the tone preceded a small patch of blown sand that stretched thin across both lanes. The wind hadn't thrown a full curtain. It just borrowed a handful from the shoulder and made a ribbon. He eased a hair and held the wheel with the kind of calm that doesn't allow the word grip. The truck answered by not insulting the sand with overcorrection. He made note, the way drivers do. A tone, then a thing. Correlation could be a goofball and a caution both. He didn't give it weight it hadn't earned yet. A little sign slid by. One of those state messages updated a few years back when the world decided cell towers were stitches in a blanket that would never fray. For emergency. Dial 911, it said. Below, call box service limited. He smiled at the word limited. Out here, everything was limited. Ice in summer, shade at noon, radio stations that didn't mind static. The thing that wasn't limited was the way the road kept going if no one asked too many questions at once. At mile 88, the tone came again. 1, 2, 2 rings. Not one. He lifted his foot an ounce and felt the truck lighten slightly, the way a boat does when someone stands up with their weight in the right place. A faint shape moved at the shoulder ahead, only as high as the hood. He prepared for a coyote or a dog, or even a wayward piece of furniture that had come off a pickup with straps treated as suggestions. What slid out was a black cow that had gone missing from a fence and wandered into the world like a child into a museum, curious, unafraid, slow. He rolled by in the inside lane and left the animal with the moon. He saw the white of another cow's face beyond the fence, turned toward its friend like it couldn't quite decide whether to speak up. 2 rings. Move with softness. He did not say the pattern aloud. He let it sit there like an egg under a towel. Here's what the desert does if a person's paying attention. It teaches small math, the spacing of posts. The way the wind asks for your passenger mirror first, and then your left. The time it takes for that tiny glow on the horizon to either be a town or a truck stop or a little refinery that will turn up close and smell like burnished metal. He added a new kind of math. Whether a ring would arrive before surprises with hooves. He didn't ask for a 4th ring. He told himself the first 3 came from a box that still had some vestigial bit of metal that sang when the truck's lights or generator fields brushed past it. He told himself the cow would have stepped out whether he rolled through or a mile behind someone else. He told himself a 3rd thing and didn't finish it. The next sign didn't stand upright. It lay face down near the fence, the way a tired person might when they decide the argument can wait until morning. The reflective lettering still worked under his beams. Road work ahead. The chime came 1 ring, patient. He breathed the kind of breath drivers take when they decide to add 3 seconds between themselves and the trouble they don't know yet. Around the bend, the orange barrels appeared, their collars scuffed. The merge was clean, no confusion. A lone flashing arrow hummed to itself on the left, pointing right with that old warm glow. He wondered if it was the cousin of the pilot car from a different night in a different county. He gave the arrow a polite nod as he passed because it felt right to acknowledge good manners. The call box at mile 93 sat open-mouthed, its hinge door gone. He could see the holes where bolts had once held innards. The post had a small badge riveted low, maintained by District 5, then a name, then stamped numbers like a dog tag. He didn't slow. The ring came anyway, 1, then another, with a decent pause between them, as if giving him time to say no. He said yes to the idea of caution without slowing to the point where the truck would argue. Ahead, in the right lane, triangles had been set in the polite pattern of someone who knew the rules and liked them. One a long way back, one closer, one up near the disabled vehicle that waited with its hazards making their own small prayer. He moved left early, signaled, returned the courtesy owed to beacons that had stood out there long enough to be bored. A man sat in the driver's seat of the stalled car with his hands on the wheel, and his chin lifted like a person who'd decided not to be mad at the way the night had turned. At the next turnout, a little gravel lot with a faded sign that had once promised a view, he eased off to check a strap that had been on his mind since he'd crossed the scales. He stepped down into air that held heat from the day the way a cast iron pan holds heat after dinner. The quiet was wide. Somewhere, a night bird worked at its own list of problems. He walked the trailer, laid a hand on metal that could be called cool, only because it wasn't hot. The strap held as it should. Coming back toward the cab, he heard the ring again, this time unmistakably from the call box at the edge of the turnout. It took him a moment to place the sound. The box was present enough to cast its small shadow in the moon. It was also empty. All that lived inside were 4 screws and a tinny printed plate with a numbered grid. Push to talk had long since become refer to the sign. The steel door lay on the ground nearby, half buried in sand, a small rectangle now for lizards and small insects to use as shade. The ring did not come from any mechanism he could point to. It came from where the mechanism would have been, neat as a bell in a camp that closed. He stood at a distance, respectful, as one would be respectful of a neighbor's window. He did not lean in. He did not speak to it. He let the tone finish and end its life without needing an answer. He climbed back up into the cab with the careful movements of a person leaving a room quietly. Back on the highway, he thought briefly about calling it in. What would he say? The box with no guts had rung to say hi and hand him a better merge. He kept the thought, turned it once, and set it on the small shelf in his mind where he kept nuts and washers that didn't match anything but might one day. The road rose into low ridges that the map called hills because calling them mountains would have been generous. The wind tried his mirror with a little more insistence. The carriage of the truck settled into the way it moved in a crosswind. Wide, hipped, dignified. He rolled with it, easing a degree off the straightness that makes a person tired and letting the rig find the line. The ring came once, then again. This time, the second ring overlapped in a way that made him think of a warning, clear and unafraid. He lifted his foot. A sliver of something dark lay across the lane, a strip of truck tire that had gone to pieces, and decided to end its travel as a wide, flat question. He aimed to miss it cleanly rather than shave it and risk the flap that could catch under his bumper. The truck stepped around it like a dance partner who knows the move. At the crest, lights bloomed in the distance, then steadied. A rest area sign arrived with the comforting blue that meant sinks, stalls, paper towels, and sometimes a bulletin board with notices for lost dogs that had been found again years ago. He pulled in because he had learned, and had the years to back it, that an unnecessary stop is sometimes exactly what keeps the necessary ones from being dramatic later. The lot was half full, neat rows of sleeping trucks, a couple of cars with blankets in windows, a camper with a string of star-shaped lights hung on its awning like a private joke. Under a breezeway, a maintenance bulletin board held lamination. Call box program update, one page said. Printed in a font that liked being read at 2 in the morning. Decommissioning complete in District 5. Use 911. He touched the edge of the plastic with a finger and felt the texture of a series of updates beneath it. Older sheets layered and forgotten, until this one replaced them. A small inset photo showed a worker in a hard hat removing a panel with a screwdriver. The caption read, "Thank you to all the technicians who maintained a lifeline for decades." A name list followed, 10 or 12 of them. He scanned to the end. Guerra sat there with dates that made perfect sense, and none, just like dates usually do. In the vending room, 2 drivers talked softly about a wildfire far south that had changed color in the night and gone calm. One of them had a face that new tires and older trucks give people, lined but not tired out. He asked, just to see if the tone lived in anyone else's night, "You ever hear a call box ring lately?" The older driver looked up, not in alarm, more like someone who'd had a word he hadn't heard in years dropped in his lap. He chuckled once. "They never rang out loud even when they were new," he said with the gentle certainty of a person telling a child a true thing. "Only inside. If you needed them, they knew. And sometimes they'd go off when the road needed you. Kind of manners, kind of memory. My aunt drove a wrecker out here in the 80s. She swore the boxes taught her the habit of pulling over before her brain wanted to. 1 ring, look far. 2. Breathe on your brake. 3. Find a shoulder and be glad." He smiled into his coffee cup and wondered if the world sometimes coordinated its small kindnesses on a private line. He thanked the man for the story and the coffee's heat and stepped back into air that had learned a little cold since he'd gone inside. The stars had moved a hand's width toward morning. He merged with the interstate again. No ring greeted him for a long stretch. He found he missed the sound in the way one misses a polite neighbor who leaves for a long weekend still at peace, just more aware of the quiet. He crossed one more long flat. The wind settled. A tumbleweed the size of a small dog rolled the wrong way and bounced off the center stripe with a sound he couldn't hear but could imagine. He smiled for it. The grade lifted toward a canyon with a name that sounded like a proper noun and a middle initial. The road pinched to 2 lanes, then opened again. At the first narrow, the tone came. 1, then a pause, then 1 again. He eased. A car ahead had slowed a fraction more than the hill warranted, and a van behind it wanted to argue about that with speed. He gave both of them room to finish that disagreement without joining it. They did. The car regained its breath. The van made peace with not being noble, tucked in, and followed. Up ahead, a sign for a scenic overlook blinked its solar light twice. He looked at it and felt the odd, honest tug to pull off. He didn't need to. The ring did not insist. He stayed with the grade. At the summit, 3 rings came clean, one after another, no hurry between them but no doubt. It was not a pattern he'd been handed yet. He weighed the years of habit that told him not to stop on an active shoulder against the shape of the moment. The shoulder just ahead widened at a service gate that led to a water tank. He signaled, eased over, and let the truck settle on the gravel with as little fuss as possible. The engine idled. The night held. He waited without a plan, hands loose, eyes moving the way they do when the brain is learning a new instrument. Below, around the bend he would have been on if he'd kept rolling, a scatter of white lights erupted like someone had breathed on a dandelion clock. Brakes. Headlights yawing, hazard lights blinking into orange flowers, opening one by one. He didn't feel relief exactly. He felt gratitude's steadier cousin, the one that keeps records without judging anyone who forgets. The tangle unwound itself with a calming speed. Someone had missed a deer, or a box had dropped, or a person had simply remembered their own body next to a big sky, and it had taken their attention briefly. All of it ended with the sort of sigh roads make when a little drama doesn't get an audience. He stepped back onto the pavement and looked at the call box nearest the service gate. This one still had its door. The instruction plate inside had aged to a fine, gentle cream. A spider had made a perfect web over the useless innards, each thread catching enough moon to look like a tiny map of rivers. He didn't touch any of it. He stood there and heard nothing, and that felt correct. By the time he eased back onto the lane, the bend below had smoothed out. Traffic moved like the idea of a line spoken softly. The ring did not come for miles after. The road lifted its shoulders and let him pass between. He thought of Guerra with a screwdriver and a cap, and the feeling of getting a panel to loosen after being stuck too many summers to count. He hoped for a minute that the names laminated on the bulletin board, and the names like them got the exact kind of thanks they wanted. Quiet, private, not a fuss, just a nod at a gas pump from someone who slept fine that night because of a habit learned from a piece of painted steel. Past the state line, the blue posts disappeared for a while, replaced by simple reflectors on tall sticks. The truck settled into that end-of-night pace that makes day feel like a gift waiting just out of sight. He tuned the radio until he found static like clean wool, turned it down, and let the engine's tone be the room. When the sunrise began not as a glow but as a decision, the ring came one last time. It did not ask for anything. It did not warn him off. It landed in the cab like a coin in a jar, and then didn't echo. He looked out across to the right where the desert shifted from starlight to first color, and saw for a second As the light found it, a line of blue posts marching off. Their little panels caught the morning and gave it back the way people give a compliment when they mean it. He kept his eyes on the lane, because that was the job, and still he saw enough to feel the odd, real sensation that the desert had invented a way to keep an old promise after the official program had put its tools away. In town later, dropping the water at a distribution center where forklifts move like bees that don't sting, a clerk signed his papers with a smile that lived in her eyes more than her mouth. "Quiet run?" she asked, not because she needed any truth, but to see if he had one he wanted to set down. "Quiet enough," he said. Road made room. She nodded the way people who work around trucks nod, like they have made room for a lot of things, and a road is just one of them. On her counter sat a ceramic mug shaped like a payphone, the kind of gift people give because a sister once worked for the phone company and it seemed right. The handset was a handle. The coin return was a painted joke. He looked at it, and the clerk laughed quietly. "Estate sale," she said. "My grandpa collected odd mugs. He used to fix those call boxes out along 40. Said he liked work that made a noise when it was glad to hear from you." He signed, handed the clipboard back, and thought, briefly, of a ring that lives where no mechanism does. In habits, in patience, in the road's way of nudging with a fingertip rather than a shove. That night, headed back with an empty trailer and a long promise to make to the other side of the map, he passed a blue post and didn't wait for the tone. He lifted his foot a fraction, scanned wide and long, moved a finger half an inch on the wheel, and let the habit stand in for whatever music the world wanted to play. If a ring sounded out loud or in his head, he didn't say. He didn't need it to obey. And that brings tonight's trip to an end. 6 unbelievable horror trucker stories from the highways that never stop whispering. Out there, beyond the reach of your headlights, the road still hides secrets no one can explain. If these stories made you shiver, give this video a like. It helps us keep the wheels turning through the night. And if you're new here, subscribe to The Sleep Haunt so you never miss another journey into the strange and the unknown. Until next time, keep your headlights bright, your mind calm, and your doors locked. Good night, and safe travels on the dark road ahead.